As the 10th PLA Group Army, leading its invasion prong across the Rio, Group Armies 7 through 13, and absolutely undaunted by anything the defenders could conceivably put up against them, the battle continued in Loredo as advanced units of the 3rd Light Mechanized Infantry Division by this point had reached the edge of Loredo, leaving behind spread out various battalions which had crossed the river in multiple points in order to either surround and destroy by cordon and sweep operations either the paramilitary or armed civilian factions within the city, or to create a kill box insofar as it related to the guard forces within the city of the 3rd of the 138th Infantry Regiment, a battalion belonging to the 72nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team. Prior to this, as the battle was occurring, already within the first 2 hours, besides the progress made by the 3rd Light Mechanized Infantry Division within Loredo city itself, other units, such as the 165th Armored Brigade, had raced across the border under its own artillery support as well as artillery support from the 43rd Artillery Brigade, which by this point was laying down heavy 152 millimeter, 155 millimeter, and 300 millimeter, both rocket and howitzer strikes, with the 152 and 155 consisting of the howitzer artillery battalions within this artillery brigade, with the 122 millimeter rocket systems being the shorter range of the two types of rocket systems mentioned, with the 300 millimeter being the most powerful and longest range rocket artillery systems available to the 43rd Artillery Brigade of the 10th PLA Group Army leading this invasion prong. In the south, where the 17th Infantry Division's main combat forces of its mechanized infantry, combat engineers, and one tank battalion had crossed the Rio and continuing to cross over Texas State Highway 83 en route to attack the border outposts, combat outposts / FOBs, in a chain created by and managed by the 172nd Brigade Engineering Battalion of the 72nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team, presently tasked with guarding this sector of the border, as it related to both previous border operations due to failed border policies in order to attempt to stabilize the border, as well as a potential show of force to any potential aggressor, although not fully having had anticipated the sheer scope and scale of the current invasion, as within Group Armies 7 through 13, some roughly 370,000 troops were within just this one invasion prong alone, much as had been the case within South Texas with the approximately 320,000 troops of that invasion prong of Group Armies 15 through 20. Being that there was an extra group army within this prong, that meant that there were more invaders coming through this sector of the border. As the 172nd Brigade Engineering Battalion was being thoroughly destroyed by elements of the 17th Infantry Division, having crossed to the north, the 536th Brigade Support Battalion, essentially a logistical element within the 72nd Infantry Brigade combat team, as well as a cluster of roughly 200 armed civilians directly to their south, were being heavily hit by artillery of the 43rd Artillery Brigade, raining down both shells and rockets within this large area just to the slight southeast of the city of Loredo itself. All the while, coming up on hour 2, advanced battalions of the advance of the 165th Armored Brigade were now beginning to reach their first main objective, which was to assist in the destruction of the 536 Brigade Support Battalion. Within a segment of this battle, the 536th had established its own logistical outposts in this area, perhaps their main outpost being attacked within this very map here, as they had a fortified motor pool right across this road, this farm road, as they're called in Texas, from their main FOB, which held their maintenance facilities for vehicles in this area, having a gravel road running through it that was also likewise built by engineer forces of the 72nd Infantry Brigade's combat team's 172nd Brigade Engineer Battalion, responsible for constructing all the forward operating bases in this border region. DF-2 tactical ballistic missiles fired from TEL systems operated by reserve battalions that were attached to the active duty battalions of the Strategic Missile Force's 3 brigades in the area, 2 being in Mexico, the 613th and 612th Brigades, with 1 acting as a Trojan unit already within eastern Texas, being the 616th Strategic Missile Forces Brigade, all from the Eastern Theater Command of China. The reserve battalions were given the older missiles of the DF-2, 3, and 4 series, and the intermediate DF-4s were fired from scaffolding, while the medium-range DF-2s and 3s could be fired from TEL systems. The active battalions comprising these brigades were firing far more advanced missile systems, ranging from DF-15s to DF-11s to DF-15s, DF-21s, DF-100 cruise missiles to the DF-17 with the hypersonic DF-ZF glide warheads. But the reserves were equipped with the older systems, which still served their purpose and caused massive destruction whenever and wherever they hit. As advanced companies of 1 armored battalion had arrived in the area, 4 platoons of 1 tank company with its headquarters platoon off this particular map segment had since already been firing their highly lethal 125mm tank shells, as well as anti-tank guided missiles, which each Type 96B carried roughly 2 on board at any given moment. Having had destroyed homes, barns, and other rural buildings en route to the headquarters company's main FOB of this chain of logistical facilities for the entire 72nd Infantry Brigade combat team, as this 1 battalion served as its key logistical force for supporting all operations within the region. There were command structures, living facilities in the form of tents, maintenance facilities, all surrounded by guard towers and barbed and concertina wire fencing on this side of this farm road, with a gravel path running between this farm road up through the middle of the main fob here. CH-901A loitering munitions, a prominent feature in many battles, as these were highly effective, cheap, and mass-produced loitering munition weapons, had likewise been fired from the 165th Armored Brigade's headquarters battalion to support operations in the field by their very own units, such as their armored battalions now attacking this area. Within just this one sector, one of 4 tank companies coming down this road, with one of 2 armored infantry companies, creating a perimeter to the west of this very fob. There were other fobs manned by other companies in the area belonging to the 536 Brigade Support Battalion, but this was their headquarters company's specific area, also encapsulating the battalion's command and control company, being its headquarters company, with the battalion's command elements within it, as well as various support and administrative entities. Heavy artillery strikes were likewise called all throughout their fob, as shown by the X's within circles, to be hit by the 165th Armored Brigade's own self-propelled artillery, in addition to the 43rd Artillery Brigade's artillery forces, firing 122 millimeter rockets from across the border, as well as PLL-01 155 millimeter howitzers in their respective battalions firing, as well as PLL-66 152 millimeter howitzers within their respective battalions firing. The PHL-81 systems were the rocket projectors which fired the 122 millimeter rockets. The longer range PHL-03 rockets of the brigade, however, were tasked with firing at further inland targets, all before the brigade was set to begin leapfrogging its sub-battalions which comprised it into the land, so that as one battalion got here, another could leap ahead, and they could do this in a few different areas to continually provide artillery support to the advancing forces beginning to move deep inland upon crossing the border. Within this map, various trucks and MRAPs attempting to flee the area were spotted and viciously suppressed and destroyed by fire from both the tanks as well as from infantry fighting vehicles and even turret gunners on armored personnel carriers, being ZBD-04A infantry fighting vehicles and Type 63 armor personnel carriers within the armored infantry component or company, as part of this attack going on in this smaller segment of the larger battle against the whole battalion. The tank company moved in 2 columns in a double column formation down this farm road, firing at various targets as they moved, shooting and moving constantly, as well as engaging small pockets of armed civilians from just south of the chain of fobs as they emerged from various farm properties within the area to engage the invasion forces as a reactionary armed civilian element. However, as the tanks moved through, they served as a bisecting element to cut off the troops of the 536th and the civilians from being able to reach and reinforce one another in the defense of the area. As shown in just this one segment of the larger battle going on. As the tanks advanced and they reached a few miles away from where they had started their advance, each column of the double column formation peeled off to form yet another perimeter, as this area was to be cordoned and swept by the armored infantry forces, as the tanks served as a blocking element, a classic hammer and anvil type of maneuver, as was done with the other column as they moved south, as there were other armored infantry forces here of the same battalion, as each armored battalion consisted of 4 different tank companies, this being one tank company of the 4, 2 armored infantry battalions, which were the mechanized infantry within that armored battalion, a headquarters company, and an anti-tank company, which is off the map and would likewise be providing its long-range HJ-10 anti-tank missiles in support from AFT-10 anti-tank vehicles. China had other anti-tank vehicles, but the AFT-10 was very simple and reliable and quite advanced, as it could deliver the long-range HJ-10 missiles with a very high degree of accuracy upon their targets from 6.2 miles away at the very longest reach, and of course within that range as well. The CH-901s engaged guard towers, portable buildings such as communications buildings, restroom and shower buildings, vehicles, as these were all armed with high explosive anti-tank warheads, or heat warheads, as prescribed by the headquarters elements firing the drones of the headquarters battalion of the 165th Armored Brigade, as there was a dedicated drone section which operated the TEL-like 48-tubed drone system, which launched 48 of these at a time, as well as a portable command facility where these could be manually operated or set to AI targeting, which the AI would pick the targets and engage them at will. This is a DF-2 preparing to hit its target, carrying nearly 2,000 pounds or nearly a ton of high explosive, which could create a total blast radius of nearly a kilometer, or about 800 meters. But the lethal radius was within 500 meters, creating a large crater of approximately almost 50 meters in the ground, as these were very potent tactical strike weapons, as they were tactical ballistic missiles, as they were called, being conventionally armed and used in battle. Command buildings were likewise hit by a DF-2 strike. The motor pool fob, which was fortified by earthen walls, was already hit by a DF-2, with another follow-up DF-2 coming down, along with rocket artillery strikes from 122 millimeter rockets here, howitzer, and more. The rocket strikes being a larger area, roughly a grid square, from the 122 millimeter rockets, being a 1 by 1 kilometer box, as this was a fairly large motor pool facility for the 536th Brigade Support Battalion, but was totally wiped out by the DF-2 tactical ballistic missiles fired by the TEL systems operated by the reserve units, which were specially mobilized in order to fire these missile systems, which had been since put in storage specifically for these reserve missile forces to fire. The active missile forces, again, fired far more new advanced missile systems, but the older missile systems were just as destructive and just as effective more often than not. The terrain in this area was hilly terrain, but of a gently rolling hill type. Largely grassland and dirt, insofar as the soil was concerned. This was ranching land for the most part, and was perfect tank country, as the saying goes, as armored vehicles could spot their targets easily from miles away. And thus engage and destroy them. Such as this convoy of MRAPs attempting to flee the area as all these loitering munitions begin taking out vehicle after vehicle with artillery strikes and tactical ballistic missile strikes. Those vehicles that did try to flee the area in panic because there was no communications, no coordination, no command and control due to the anti-satellite weapon strikes, the downing of the military networks, grid, telecom, due to cyber attacks, as well as the electronic warfare interfering with redundant systems that have been that have grid. These forces were easily and quickly engaged and thereby destroyed. And these attacking forces in just this one segment are literally only two companies of one battalion of the 136th Armored Brigade, as this armored brigade had 4 battalions that were armored battalions, 1 combat engineer battalion, 1 short-range air defense battalion, 1 self-propelled artillery battalion, and of course its headquarters battalion. As well as the prior map just now shown of the headquarters company of the 536th Brigade Engineering Battalion Brigade Support Battalion being destroyed, along with an armed civilian element just to the south. The HHC had again since been destroyed much earlier in the battle by all the artillery fire. Even the follow-up cruise missiles fired by container-based systems such as YJ-18Cs and Caliber cruise missiles weren't even completely necessary, as the artillery had very quickly done the job and eliminated the 72nd Infantry Brigade combat team's entire command elements. As the hostilities heated up and raged onward, a constellation of drones from the tiniest squad and/or platoon level quadcopter recon drones all the way up to the larger fixed-wing recon/armed drones, coupled together with the SIGINT and ELINT / camera-equipped spy aircraft being involved as well, finally all the way up to the satellite-based ISR assets all constantly relayed the updated rivers of data into the AI processing systems, utilized and managed by the intelligence analysts who provided an ever-updated list of evolving targets to the forces in the field, all as the fighting ebbed and flowed, and the virtual galaxy of units and assets moved about by land, sea, and air. And unfortunately for the defenders, the tempo and sheer speed by which the invasion was unfolding already, in addition to their lack of communications and intel on their end, led to failure after failure as it related to the defenders. As matters stood, by hour 1 of the invasion, just within this sector of the invasion alone, the headquarters of Headquarters Company of the 72nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team was all but wiped out by the ferocity of the opening artillery salvos, both howitzer and rocket, all as the river crossing was underway into the nation within just the first hour alone. Again, the HHC, its command elements, totally wiped out, with very few survivors managing to escape into the wilderness, melting away into the countryside along with others of the now disintegrating defense forces, albeit only a very slight number managing to flee with their lives, possibly to even continue the fight in the future.